Every war has two stories. The one they told you, and the one they buried. The files are now open. On April 24th, 1980, 8 American helicopters launched from the USS Nimitz into the Iranian desert on the most audacious rescue mission in U.S. military history. Their objective, extract 52 American hostages from the heart of Tehran. None of them would make it to Tehran. By dawn, 8 Americans were dead, 5 helicopters were destroyed, and a fireball visible for miles lit up the desert. Operation Eagle Claw didn't just fail, it changed the American military forever. To understand the disaster, you have to go back to the morning it all began. November 4th, 1979. In Tehran, a crowd of Iranian revolutionaries storms the gates of the United States Embassy. They overwhelm the Marine Guards, blindfold the staff, and parade them before the cameras. 66 Americans are taken hostage. 14 are released in the weeks that follow. 52 remain, held in the heart of a hostile capital halfway around the world. What everyone expected to last days stretched into weeks, then months. Diplomatic channels opened and slammed shut. Economic sanctions did nothing. Frozen assets did nothing. Back-channel talks collapsed almost as fast as they began. President Jimmy Carter watched his options vanish one by one, while a nation counted the days on the evening news, and a new program called Nightline put the number on screen every single night. By the spring of 1980, the pressure was unbearable. So the Pentagon was told to build something that had never been done. A rescue deep inside a country with no friendly borders, no nearby bases, and a capital city of millions. They assembled a joint task force from every corner of the military. A brand new unit called deltaforce that had never fired a shot in combat, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations crews, Navy ships, and Marine pilots. The plan was breathtakingly complex. Fly hundreds of miles into the Iranian desert under cover of darkness. Stage at a secret refueling point called Desert 1. Hide for a full day. Drive into Tehran in trucks bought and staged by undercover agents. Assault the embassy compound, free the hostages, and fly everyone out from a captured airfield. 2 nights, 5 branches, hundreds of miles of enemy territory, with no margin for error and no cavalry coming if it went wrong. Colonel Charlie Beckwith, the founder and commander of Delta Force, called it the most complex military operation since D-Day. But the mission had a fatal flaw built into its DNA, and every planner involved knew it. In 1980, there was no unified Special Operations Command. None. Each branch of the military guarded its own turf, and each one demanded a piece of the mission. The Army had the assault force. The Navy owned the helicopters. The Marines would fly them. The Air Force ran the transports. Nobody was truly in charge of all of it at once. The result was a Frankenstein operation, stitched together from parts that had never worked as one body. Start with the helicopters because that is where it ends. The planners calculated they needed a minimum of 6 working aircraft to carry the assault force and the freed hostages back out. To be safe, they launched 8. But these were RH-53D Sea Stallions, Navy minesweeping helicopters, never designed for long-range desert infiltration, flown by Marine pilots with almost no experience in this kind of mission. And critically, there were no spares waiting in reserve. If they lost 3, the math collapsed. Then there were the rehearsals or the lack of them. A full-scale dress rehearsal, with every unit moving together, was judged too risky. Too many people, too many moving parts, too much chance the secret would leak and the hostages would pay for it. So the pieces trained apart, in scattered corners of the country, and never once practiced the whole mission as a single machine. The first time all the parts came together would be the night it counted. The distances were brutal. Desert 1 sat roughly 600 miles from the carrier. The helicopters would be flying low, at night, at the very edge of their fuel range before they even reached the refueling point. And the weather along that route was a near total unknown. There was no reliable forecast for the dust that desert nights can throw up without warning, the kind of dust that can blind a pilot in seconds. Every one of these flaws was known. Every one was accepted as a risk worth taking, because the alternative was leaving 52 Americans in captivity indefinitely. On the night of April 24, 1980, The mission launched anyway. What happened in the next 6 hours would haunt the American military for a generation. At dusk, 8 helicopters lifted off the deck of the Nimitz and turned toward the Iranian coast. From an airfield in Egypt, then a staging base, C-130 transport planes carrying deltaforce and rubber bladders full of fuel took off to meet them at Desert 1. For the first hour, it worked. The machine was moving, then it started to come apart. Helicopter number 6 flashed a warning of a possible cracked rotor blade, a failure that can tear an aircraft apart in flight. The crew set it down in the open desert and abandoned it. Another helicopter landed, picked them up, and pressed on. 7 left. Then the desert struck back. The formation flew straight into a haboob, a massive wall of suspended dust that rose without warning and swallowed the moonlight, dropping visibility to almost nothing. The pilots had never flown blind in conditions like this. They had no way to see the horizon, no way to tell up from down except their instruments. Inside that choking cloud, helicopter number 5 lost critical navigation and flight instruments and made the agonizing call to turn back toward the carrier. 6 remaining, exactly the minimum. No margin left at all. The survivors limped into Desert 1, well behind schedule, rotors screaming as Delta Force and the air crews waited on the ground in the dark. And then came the blow that ended everything. Helicopter number 2 arrived with a hydraulic failure that could not be repaired in the field. It simply could not fly the mission. That left 5 operational aircraft, 1 below the minimum of 6. Beckwith faced the worst decision a commander can make. He had the men. He had the will. He did not have the machines. He recommended they abort. The call went up the chain, all the way to the White House, where President Carter, after an agonizing pause, agreed. The mission was dead. They just had to get out. But what happened next turned a failed mission into an American nightmare. Now they had to leave, and the desert floor was chaos. Dust, darkness, roaring engines, and aircraft crowded into a tiny patch of sand that was never meant to hold them all at once. The fuel they had burned getting in now had to be redistributed for the trip out. 1 helicopter, number 3, lifted off to reposition and take on fuel. In the swirling brownout, the pilot lost sight of the ground and everything around him. There was no horizon, no reference, nothing but blowing sand lit by aircraft lights. The helicopter drifted sideways, blind, into a parked C-130, a transport loaded with fuel and Delta operators waiting to go home. The 2 aircraft ignited in an instant. A fireball erupted into the night sky, bright enough to be seen for miles across the empty desert. Ammunition began to cook off in the flames, sending rounds screaming in every direction. Men ran from the inferno, dragging the wounded with them. 8 Americans did not make it out. 5 Air Force crewmen and 3 Marines were killed in the fire. The survivors crowded onto the remaining C-130s and lifted off, forced to leave behind their fallen, the burning helicopters, and classified documents in the wreckage. In the days that followed, the Iranians scattered the hostages to cities across the country, making any second rescue attempt impossible. The one shot they had was gone. Before anything else, remember the 8. This was sacrifice, not just failure. Men who flew into the dark knowing the odds, for strangers they had never met, because their country asked them to. The fallout was enormous. The failed rescue became one of the defining images of a presidency in crisis and is widely cited as a factor in Carter's defeat that November. A review board, the Holloway Commission, dug into what went wrong and found 23 critical problems. At the very top of the list was the one everybody already knew. There was no unified command to run special operations. So the military rebuilt itself from the lessons written in that desert. In 1987, the United States Special Operations Command was established, so the branches would never again improvise their way into a mission of this scale. A dedicated aviation unit, the 160th SOAR, the Nightstalkers, was created and trained to fly the hardest missions in the worst conditions on Earth, so that special operators would never again be failed by their aircraft. Every operation that came after was shaped by Eagle Claw, Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm. The raid that killed Osama bin Laden, flown by the very unit born from this failure. The men who planned that raid studied this night, so it would never happen again. 8 men flew into the desert and never came home. Their failure built the most lethal special operations force the world has ever seen, and it all started with a fireball in the Iranian desert. So here's what I want you to do. If this story hit you, give this video a like, drop a comment, and tell me which failed military operation you want us to cover next. Smash that subscribe button, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next file we crack open. The files are now open.